Good morning, everyone. I would say Shabbat Shalom, but I think that was yesterday. We're going to begin with an introduction, but really no introduction is needed because I see many familiar faces who have been with us the entire weekend. This has been really, really special. Rabbi Hartman has brought together not just the Sinai community, but so many different communities that have joined us over this Shabbat, from Friday night to Shabbat morning to this morning. Can't forget the bonus that we got, even though you weren't here in person. We got to do a Zoom lecture at the end of October. And for this introduction, Rabbi Hartman, I'm going to read it off the book cover because if you're online or in person, you should make sure you get your copy. It's an amazing, amazing read that really, for myself, as I read this, transformed who I am as a Jew in North America in relationship with Israel, which we're going to speak about today. Rabbi Donniel Hartman, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, where he holds the Kaufman Family Chair in Jewish Philosophy, author of Putting God Second, How to Save Religion from Itself, and The Boundaries of Judaism, among other books, founder of religious education, training, and enrichment programs in Israel and North America. And as we've said, if you have not put it on the top of your playlist, please do. The very popular Jewish podcast, For Heaven's Sake, it's Rabbi Guzik said yesterday, and I agree with her as well, which I agree with everything that she says as well, is it really has gotten us through these last 130 days or so, and I know it will continue to allow us to not search for answers, but really to search for the right questions that we ask as Jews around the world. So without further ado, we'll be in conversation with his new book, Who Are the Jews and Who Can We Become? By Rabbi Donniel Hartman. Rabbi Donniel Hartman. So this morning will be a conversation about this book. If you have not read it, we'll give you some insights into it. And so I think we'll start there, but I'm actually going to start with the end of the book because I was shocked when I got to the last line and it ends with a question. And the question is basically, is our story worth telling? And so many people that I've spoken to, specifically young people in their 20s over this last 130 days, are seeing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and trying to wear a Magen David proudly in North America. And one actually was somebody who asked you a question over this weekend, said to me just 2 weeks ago, is this even worth it? And so you go through an amazing discussion about the Exodus and Genesis covenant, which we'll get to, but what is the elevator pitch of, is this story worth it?
Is this working? There's some of you who know me. I don't know how to give elevators pitches.
It's a very tall building.
It's a tall building. It's a tall, slow, and if the elevator breaks for a while,
then you're in the right place.
I want to explain the question because I ask at the end of the book, is this story worth telling? And the last line is, this is the story that I have told. Is this make it worthwhile for you? You tell me. You decide. We're living at a time that we are not bequeathing our Judaism, our relationship to Judaism, our Jewish identity, and our relationship to Israel to our children. There's no passing down. Your kids could have a Jewish education. They could come to shul. They could go to camp. That increases your odds. But everybody today, as you all know, are Jews by choice. Everybody. Jews by choice is not a category for converts. Jews by choice is a category for every single Jew. We have complex identities. Being a Jew is part of our identity. Being American is another story we tell. Our gender is increasingly a very important part of our identity. Even more so, our political affiliation, liberal, conservative. Pew says there's no intermarriage across political lines. None. We find jobs. We live in neighborhoods. You know in America how people are increasingly moving to states depending on political. We have so many identities. We live in multiple spheres in which Judaism is just one of the spheres of identity that we have. It's only one. It's not the only one. And as a result, we need to, if our identity is going to work, you can't guilt people, you can't fear them into. They're going to have to choose, and they'll only choose if they're inspired. And the question is, what story we tell? And so this is the book about the story that I've learned, that I've discovered. It's a story, like in most things, this is my story of Jewishness, how I understand it. Is it going to be compelling? You have to decide. But what we have to decide is to understand that that's the way we have to talk. Do we have a story of Judaism that's inspiring? Now, you're right. Today it's getting harder. Now, in the past, anti-Semitism was always an identity boost. It helped Jewish identity. If you could live, you were a stronger Jew. Like that was a little, the if is a big if, but if you survive a pogrom, for most of Jewish history, there wasn't a psychological sense that you could leave. Like the outside world was so foreign, so alienating. Jews had a singular identity, and anti-Semitism made that identity even more singular, more isolated. And so even if we didn't inspire Jews, they were frightened to be Jews. They were frightened into being Jews. Fear created, that's right. Who is a Jew? What's the earliest definition of who is a Jew? Not the earliest, the Middle Ages. He or she who they hate. Which, by the way, becomes the definition of who is a Jew for the state of Israel. No joke. I hope you know that. Officially, under the laws of the state of Israel, anybody who would be killed by Hitler for being a Jew gets automatic citizenship in the state of Israel. That's today. If Hitler thought you were a Jew, even if under Jewish law you're not a Jew, if you have one Jewish grandparent, you have automatic citizenship in the state of Israel. So this is not a theoretical thing. This is a community forged by being the other throughout history. But we're not the other in America or in Canada. We're not the other. Now, today, and my book doesn't take this into account at all, and we could talk about that. It's a weakness in the book. It's because at the time I wrote it before October 7th. I would have written some things differently. Anti-Semitism and fear are now a greater part of Jewish consciousness in North America than they were before October 7th. And that's just simply a fact. Now, that anti-Semitism in the short run is going to create a boost, a short little injection of energy into Jewishness. But over time, it's actually going to work the opposite. And I'll just, again, I'm not criticizing anybody, I'm just describing a reality. Imagine, forget America, imagine you live somewhere. And you're living with a spouse who's not Jewish. And you're Jewish. And you're beginning to be subjected to persecution. Why would you continue in the Jewish story? You have an exit. Many of our non-Jews who are married to Jews, even without converting, feel that they're part of the Jewish community. That's, again, an empirical fact. Many Jews who intermarried as distinct in the past do not leave. They're not seeing it. Intermarriage and assimilation are not identical terms. Again, that's just objectively the case. Non-Jewish spouse is willing to engage. We have a great religion. They're willing to raise children Jewishly. They belong to synagogues. They participate. And now comes anti-Semitism. I could see a conversation over breakfast. You know, you know that nursery school you were thinking of? Do you think maybe we should rethink, and just by the way, my parents called me. And they were wondering too, that maybe, do we really need a mezuzah? It's like, isn't it Jewishness in the heart? Paul says it, it's like, it's what you feel. So like, can't we just maybe be anti-Semitism when you have multiple identities creates a short-term potential, but doesn't actually weakens. So we think that anti-Semitism in our generation is going to work the way it's worked for the last 2,000 years, but we have an unprecedented reality of complex Jewish identities as never before. The only time our identities were as complex was in the times of the Bible, when we really assimilated and integrated with the 7 Canaanite nations. And Judaism had a hard time showing up because we were Canaanites. Like, Solomon puts idols into the temple. That's not me. Don't blame me for that. Solomon did it. And he just put them in. His wife, his spouse. Yes, what do you want? I want to make you feel comfortable. We're ecumenical. All of the above. So we were but since then, this reality of complex identity. So at the end of the day, and this is part of what I was talking about over the weekend, Zionism, Israel, synagogue, rabbis, rituals, teaching. We have to compete for Jews who have another option. They don't have to do anything. And the easiest thing that they don't have to do is show up. They don't even have to show up. Now in Israel, you don't show up, but the environment creates a very powerful Jewish identity. The calendar in Israel, the chazan in Israel is the TV station and the radio station. And when a holiday comes, already a month beforehand on the shelves, every holiday we do food. We're like a little obsessed about it, because that's what happens with kashrut. We got nervous that God was taking away food from us. So we get nervous about it, so we get food a lot of times. It's like a whole big thing for us. So a month before every holiday, we have the foods, the supermarket shelves change. It's the environment. You don't have that here. And that means we have to work harder. So at the end, the question is this story worth telling? Depends what story we tell. And that's why throughout the weekend, when I talk about the moral challenges and responsibilities of Israel, some people get nervous and angry at me. Oh, don't, just say Israel's great. Say Israel's wonderful. The job of a Zionist is to tell the kids how wonderful we are. It doesn't work that way. Honesty, moral reflection, doubts, uncertainty. Tell a compelling story, and then we have a chance for it to continue. And this is, I'm not doing it now, but this is one version of a story we can tell, which has given to my life profound meaning. Whether it'll work or not, that's, as we say, it's not even in your hands. It's in your hands to tell a story. Whether that story is carried on is now in the hands of our children.
So you speak about the complex identities, which you mentioned, and we're going to go to the beginning of the book now, for those of you who are intrigued. Genesis and Exodus. I actually gave a sermon a couple of weeks ago about, are we a Genesis Jew or an Exodus Jew? I found my hypothesis was that we were Genesis Jews before October 7th. We actually turned into Exodus Jews after October 7th, but let's go into these definitions and how you even arrived at defining these definitions. So no pun intended, but what is the genesis of this Genesis versus Exodus Jew? What is a Genesis Jew in terms of the Bible? What is an Exodus Jew in terms of the Bible? Are they mutually exclusive?
Right. Thank you. Before I wrote the book, I had a core way of looking. There was a core foundation to how I thought about Jews and the Jewish people. And I always understood that there was something deeper to Jewishness than the particular way that a Jew, the particular denomination that a Jew belongs to. And that one of our core responsibilities was to develop a way to talk about Jewish peoplehood that did not allow our particular denominational beliefs to create divides amongst the Jewish people. I'm an Orthodox Jew, or Orthodox-ish. Everybody's strange. No, we all are. We're not boxes. We try to breathe, right? Each one of us tries to breathe, and I breathe mostly within orthodoxy, as long as I have freedom for gender equality and LGBTQ rights and rights of non-Jews and a few other things. But other than that, I'm really orthodox. But I knew that being a Jew is not defined, or it's not, Jewishness cannot be controlled by a denomination. And I could live my Jewish life, but the Jews who were different than me weren't inferior Jews. And it's a very deep part of my Zionism. I am paid to love Judaism. It's my job. I make a nice living from it. But the truth is, I love the Jewish people more. Truth is, what really got me into the story, what really holds me, is my love and commitment and loyalty to the Jewish people. And I always felt that Jewish peoplehood came before Judaism. But then, as I began to think about this, and I've been teaching religious pluralism and serving Jews of different backgrounds my whole life. My career started as a rabbi of a JCC, where there were 11,000 members of every denomination. And particular denominations are valuable, but they can't be the criteria for either authentic Judaism, and even more so, who is a Jew. Jewishness has to be bigger than the denomination we belong to. And as I was thinking about this, and I came up, I read, and I've been studying. I realized this anomaly. God turns to Abraham and says, Lech lecha, go forth. God says to Abraham, prove to me that you're different than all the other mediocre people who I created from chapter 1 through chapter 12. I don't like any of them. Noah was okay, but he was just better than everybody. He wasn't great. Prove to me that I actually have a partner. Leave your family. Leave your birthplace. Leave everything that you care about and go to the land that I will show you. And if you do that, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and I will make your name great. Abraham actually has an impossible life. And according to the rabbinic tradition, God constantly, after being traumatized by human mediocrity for 11 chapters and 2,000 years, God is traumatized and as a result is testing Abraham over and over and over again, culminating in, do you love me enough? Give me your kid. Really? Really? It's really a dysfunctional, pathetic relationship. Really is a terrible thing. As you all know, whenever you have to prove that you love someone, the relationship's over. You either know or you don't, prove. Did you, the difference when you're dating, who called whom last? I'm not calling. Why should I call? I called you. When you get married, it's grow up. Right? It's just grow up. Are you counting? Who called whom last when? So God is really stuck after the trauma of creating human beings and thinking that they were going to be great and getting what he got. So God makes Abraham's life miserable, truly a miserable life. Promises him that he will be as numerous as the stars in the heaven and the sands of the seashore. And at the end, he ekes out one pishy kid. One from Hagar and one from Sarah. And the one from Sarah, he says, no, you love him? Are you happy? And Abraham says, the truth is you promised me a lot, but this is good enough. I'm really happy now. And God says, I'm so happy you're happy. Who do you love more? Me or your kid? It's a sad story. But the interesting thing that began to dawn on me is outside of Abraham, God promises, I will make of you a great nation. After the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, God says, the angel says, because you have done this, and you have not withheld your son, your beloved one, from me, I will make you as numerous as the stars of heaven, and your children will capture the whole earth. But what do? In the book of Genesis, we do nothing. What do? Abraham has to do Jewish. We are Jewish by virtue of what Abraham did. God enters into a covenant with us, not because of what we do, but because of what Abraham did. And as for years, I've been troubled by the mediocrity of the book of Genesis. Isaac, completely dysfunctional, never got over the fact that his father wanted to kill him. Jacob, this is not me, this is the thing. If I could go look, read it. I'm not saying it, it's what the book says. Jacob, a devious kid. Esau is much better than Jacob, but we don't pick him. And then his kids, one of them sleeps with his father's wife. The other ones, they torture their father and tell him that they've killed him. The other ones are massacring people in Shechem. These are the Jews? Then I began to realize that there is actually something very interesting going on here. These aren't mediocre Jews. These are different Jews. And that the covenant of Genesis is not a covenant of doing, it's a covenant of being. That Jewishness is not only what you do or what you believe, it's being part of a family. Now, this family is not a race, because in the Bible you intermarried into it, had no racial notions, it had no notions of superiority, but that there is a sense of Jewishness which is very, very deep. And all the pieces began to come together. Every rabbi in North America is asked at some point in their career over and over and over again, Rabbi, could I be a good Jew even though I don't believe in God? Now I want you to analyze this question. No priest has ever asked this question. No imam either. They don't ask, could I be a Jew? That would be small. Could I be a good Jew? I have a right. And the truth is, you can. You can. Because Genesis says you are Jewish. And and while this seems like a subtle point, it's not that we're just a people. No, this is the covenant that God makes with us. Judaism begins with a covenant between God and a people, in which God says to be Jewish is to be part of a people and a family and to walk throughout history together. That is a Jew. And then one of the most famous rulings in Jewish law, one of the only rulings that nobody debates, and that's pretty good, because under Judaism there's nothing that we don't debate. And this is from the 10th century, there is almost not a single halachic authority that contests the following ruling. A Jew, even though they sin, they are still a Jew. And there's a very famous case, and there's thousands of them, but Eliezer Waldenberg, the head of the court in Jerusalem, tells the story in his halachic rulings, is asked. A woman comes and she had married an Anglican. And she comes to the court and says, I married him because his parents wanted, the marriage didn't work out. I want to come back. Could I please convert back to Judaism? And the ultra-Orthodox Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg turns her down and says, you're not allowed to convert back to Judaism after what you did. And the reason why you can't convert is because you never left. You never left. You became an Anglican? That's nice. Jewish? That's not that's okay, that's a problem, but Jewishly? So there's something deeper. So the Genesis covenant, which is about a certain sense of Jewishness, which means belonging. It's loyalty. It's acceptance of our people as part of our people. That's the first covenant. Exodus, at the beginning, continues the Genesis covenant. Our exodus from Egypt. What does the Bible tell us about the great things that the Jewish people did in Egypt to warrant redemption? Do any of you remember the stories? You remember them? You don't remember them because there are none. It's It's a trick. What we rabbis do that to you from time to time. Especially on a Sunday morning, you're a little
Trying
sleepy.
to remember them.
We got you. You were trying like, oh my God, like what did I forget? Nothing. We're not told anything. The reason why we're redeemed is because we cried. And God remembers the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's it. We are redeemed because we suffered. We didn't redeem because we did it. We don't have to earn it, because under the Genesis covenant, you don't have to earn it being Jewish. This is a covenant of grace. It's a covenant of grace in which God embraces and says, I love you and accept you forever. And I am going to walk with you in an eternal covenant. And that's my decision. It's a covenant of grace. But in Exodus, after the Exodus story, God, right before Mount Sinai, God turns to Moses and says, speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, if you will observe my commandments and walk in my ways, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And the word, which doesn't appear in Genesis, is the word if. Now there's conditions. And in Exodus, God basically says, I want everybody to be like Abraham. Jewishness is not only who you are, it's not a covenant of being, it's a covenant of becoming. It's also a challenge. There's a covenant of grace in which I love you unconditionally, and there's a covenant of expectation. And by the way, as a parent, we all understand that. If you just have expectations from your kids without unconditional love, that's not what family does. That's friends. Family has to be unconditional. But if it's only unconditional, your kids will be schleps. Yeah, right? We know it's, and how to balance it, nobody knows, and that's why we pay for our kids' therapy, because we know we're going to get it wrong. That's one of your obligations. You pay for it because you can't get it right. It's just these two principles. I have to love you unconditionally, and you have to feel that I respect you enough to actually expect things from you. Oh, you didn't expect anything from me. You didn't care about me enough. I didn't think I could achieve, or you expected too much from me, or you didn't love me enough. Like, you're never going to get it right, but that's the essence. That's what our story, that's Exodus and Genesis. Exodus says to the Jewish people, you got to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You have to be outstanding. What does the Ten Commandments start? I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Now I took you out because of my Genesis commitments. But now I say, you shall have no other gods besides me. And with that begins a tradition of constantly God demanding. But the interesting thing in the second part of your question is that it's not like Genesis is the first stage and Exodus is the second stage. Not at all. They two continue to talk, and I tell the story of how the two talk with each other throughout the Bible, talk with each other throughout the Talmud, talk through each other throughout the Middle Ages, and play off each other throughout Jewish history. And that the Jewish people get it wrong when one covenant is too strong. When all you have is the covenant of Genesis, at the end, like, is this a story? Like, that's it? Who are you? Why should you be Jewish? Only marry Jews, only do what? Because you're Jewish. Like, cause. Like, okay. Like, that's it? Our job is just to walk throughout history and just to be Jewish? And on the other hand, if Jewishness is only do Jewish, Exodus, commanded, the covenant of becoming, then there is no Jewish people. And that's alien, it's alien to our tradition. Our tradition, religion. It's not that Judaism is divided between a religion and a nation. No, that posits that there's some external conflict. Our religion embraces a Jew for who you are. It's part of your religious tradition, not your national identity. That's why in the Seder, we have 4 children, right? Now, there's one child who we didn't know how to talk to, but we'll leave aside the answer, the wicked child. What does the wicked child say? The child's not wicked, and we should have had a much better answer. But the wicked child says, Ma avodah zot lachem, what is this worship to you? to you and not to him, since he is a heretic in the essence. He has separated himself from the community, and you have to separate yourself from him. Judaism is the only tradition which sees separating from the community as a heresy. We use that term, heresy. Our collective identity is part of my religious identity. That's why secular Israelis in Israel. I ordain secular rabbis. I see secularism as religious. There's multiple, it's religious. It's a religious identity. It's a way of looking at Jewishness and our story. It's not a national political one. And so we have these two stories, and when they dance together, the Jewish story is interesting. When they're separate, we either become ultra-nationalists or we become just little denominations, small. There's the drama of Jewish history is a drama of these two stories interacting with each other.
So that's the drama on the national, international level, but you write in your book specifically that how we deal with alienating texts within our tradition, that we personally can't make that synthesis. And you said that, I quote, you needed the Maimonides text that was the oxygen for your life in order to make these covenants symbiotic and work together. What was that text, and what alienated you that brought you to that text that said they can dance together?
Right. Now, since I'm a Genesis Jew, Judaism doesn't get to alienate me. I'm a Genesis Jew. Judaism has to talk to me. I have a right. Genesis Judaism gives me a claim. Gives me a claim that demands that Judaism speak to me for who I am. And I always felt that an over-exodized Judaism creates a denominationalism that doesn't give me the energy to breathe. Doesn't give me the energy to breathe. Again, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and Yitzhak Greenberg was right. You know, he said, I don't care what denomination you belong to as long as you're embarrassed by it. It was a very deep, insightful statement that Yitzhak made. It really is. It's such a profound statement, because we make choices, but, just get over yourself. But denominational Judaism was always hard for me, because I don't fit into a box. I don't. But it's Genesis that gives me the room, because no one could, in Genesis, there's no such thing as a bad Jew. There's only a Jew. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And if God tolerates me in my mediocrity, then Jewish people have to tolerate themselves with their diversity. Now, personally, in my own Jewish life, I was raised this way. I was raised that I was raised by my father and my mother, that my mind and my moral conscience have to guide me. And they are the primary source of authority in my life. And that I am never to bend either my mind or my moral principles to God, to a tradition, to anything. Judaism, I have to make it my own. I am a Genesis 18 Jew, as distinct from a Genesis 22 Jew. Genesis 22, if Judaism was the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, I'd be gone. If that's what religiosity demands, that loyalty to God demands that you reject what you know to be correct and moral, I'm out. No one asked, I don't accept that. So I am a very secular Orthodox Jew. I observe, but my authority is my moral conscience and what it is that I know. And I might get it wrong, but my responsibility is as such. And growing up and going to classical yeshivot, where the paradigm of Jewishness was Genesis 22, I'm a Genesis 18 Jew, in which Abraham stands up into God and says, will the judge of the whole earth not deal justly? Abraham demands of God to live up to Abraham's notion of ethics and not the opposite. That the good is independent of God. This goes back to my book on putting God second, how to save religion from itself. So for me, this was a constant struggle. And it was Maimonides. Besides, my parents set the standard, and now the question is, could I live with it? Like, how do you live with it? And it was Maimonides, Guide for the Perplexed 2:25, who says, any place that the tradition or that what it seems to be stated violates the truth, know that that's not what the text means, and that it is your job to reinterpret it, because the tradition cannot violate the truth. Maimonides became the winds in my, like winds beneath my feet. I'll be very contempt. Whatever it is, whoever said that. I think there's a song like that, right? Oh, there is yet? Okay. I knew I had it somewhere. But Maimonides became the place, yes. And my whole life was about, how do I tell a story where I could breathe, and at the same time, through the idea of Genesis, how does my whole teaching, personally and at the Hartman Institute, be a teaching not about telling people what they should do, not about determining who's a good Jew or who's a bad Jew, but how do I activate their Genesis consciousness so that they could find the Exodus Judaism that they could live with? How do I create a Jewishness where we're not walking around and saying, are you a good Jew? Are you a good Zionist? If you're like me, you're a good Jew. If you're like me, you're a good Zionist. You use this word. I can't, stop it. Stop it. My whole life in Orthodoxy, people shunned me. I was shunned. Horrific things were done to me in my life. Terrible things. Terrible. Because I was different, because of my last name. One of the easier ones, I went to a yeshiva. I combined military service and yeshiva training. And after 6 months in the army, we go to yeshiva. And there were 67 students in the first year class. And the most sensitive, nice, moral, gentle person was in charge of all 67 students to make sure that they integrated into yeshiva, that they knew that they were comfortable, that they had someone to talk to. And as on his own, he decided to speak to 66 out of the 67. And my friend asked him, what about Donniel? He said, he's a Hartman, I have nothing to talk to him about. I will never do that to any Jew in the world. I don't care what you do. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what your commitment to Israel is or what your commitment to Judaism and what you understand. I will never walk away from you. I will never make you feel that you're less of a Jew. I will walk with you. Your problems are my problems. Your search for meaning is my obligation. Your right to dignity, to respect, to a place around the table is the mission of my life. That's Genesis Judaism. But at the same time, my teaching is about how do I make you or enable you to grow within your story in terms that are commensurate with what you believe, not with what I believe. I have a rabbinic school in Israel and also one in North America. I, as an Orthodox rabbi, ordained conservative reform, secular Jews, men, women, gay, straight. I don't want more Donniels in the world. There's enough. I just want rabbis out there who can so more Jews could love their Jewishness. It's not about your denomination. It's about creating a spirit of tolerance and meaning, respect, love, and at the same time challenges, but not challenging people to be like you, not sitting back and saying, oh, what did you just say? Creating challenges within your terms, for you to be more, for you to be stronger in terms that you understand. And that's Maimonides. Every Jew has to ensure that Judaism doesn't violate that which they know to be true or that which they know to be good. And what we know to be true and what we know to be good is not the same. And that's why Judaism doesn't have to be the same. But Genesis unites us, and an aspiration for meaning of Exodus unites us, even though we have different Exodus Judaisms and different expressions of it. And it was Maimonides. If it wasn't for Maimonides and my discovering this, I couldn't breathe. And I found a way to breathe. And my life's work is to enable other Jews to breathe too.
One last question before I open up to Q&A. Before the last question, we want to, of course, thank Abner and Roz Goldstine for this amazing, amazing weekend. I feel like time is running out, and we have only begun, so we are excited to continue this.
I apologize. I talk long.
No. This is a good thing. That means you're giving us so much food for thought.
No elevator. I don't know how to do an elevator speech.
Next week, I believe, or when you shortly go back, you'll be sitting back in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, in Israel, and we'll be still here. And so how do we synthesize here as North American Jews in Los Angeles with our relationship in Israel and the Genesis and Exodus covenant? What do we do?
October 7th is a moment that demands loyalty. It's actually what I call Genesis Zionism. There's also a Genesis Zionism and there's an Exodus Zionism. Genesis Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to be free and safe in our land. That's Genesis Zionism. Exodus Zionism is our obligation to create a Jewish state which lives up to the standards of "you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." As I said yesterday, and now I'll use some of these categories. In the midst of trauma, you're going to want the Genesis consciousness to define your relationship with Israel. Basically, it's just about supporting the Zionism of being. Hamas wanted to undermine our ability to be. That's what, they weren't fighting our faith. And they don't say Itbach al Yisraelun, it's Itbach al Yehud. Kill the Jew. They don't want us to live. And our response was a core expression of Genesis Zionism. I have a right to be. And anybody who thinks that we alone don't have a right to be, that's when anti-Zionism feels like anti-Semitism. I don't have a right to be. Every other nation in the world has a right to be. Every other nation in the world has a right to make mistakes without somebody saying your right to be is undermined. Nobody's walking around saying that after Russia attacked Ukraine, Russia has no right to be. You don't do that. Also, nobody says, because I don't like a prime minister or a president, your country doesn't have a right to be. Genesis Zionism stands up, and on October 7th, I feel this in every city that I come to. Jews are standing up and saying, we have a right to be also. We have a right to be. And that's right. We thought the battle for Genesis Zionism was over. It's not over. Anti-Semitism is back. Anti-Zionism is more, is the term virulent? It came out? Virulent, it's a hard word to say. It's there. It's ugly. Now, I don't mind if somebody is a non-Zionist. You don't have to, this notion though that we alone don't have a right to be, we alone don't have a right to go to war, we alone don't have, that already on October 7th, Hamas was justified in killing us. I apologize. I don't want to even, I curse sometimes. I won't. I'll be more rabbinic. But they deserve certain curses. Pick your curse. It's morally bankrupt. So part of our responsibility is to stand strong as Genesis Jews and as Genesis Zionists, and to understand the moral right to be a Genesis Zionist. I am a people. And it's not that I'm a nation, it's part of my Jewishness. But at the same time, if all we have is a fight to be, which doesn't constantly challenge ourselves, what are the obligations of Exodus Zionism? I spoke this weekend about how do you fight a just war justly. I spoke about the relationship and thinking about what are moral responsibilities to Gazans. And you might not agree with what I suggested, but the question, what are our obligations to Israeli Arab Palestinians? What are our obligations to think about the future two-state solution? What are our obligations to think about issues of state and religious freedom and human rights and democracy in Israel? All of those are Exodus Zionisms. Your jobs. What's that line in the Mission Impossible? This is something if you choose to take it, or something like that. If you accept your mission, if you accept it, to be a Zionist is to tell a story of Genesis and Exodus Judaism and Genesis and Exodus Zionism. And I want to tell you, many of us make a mistake. When our children ask Exodus questions about Israel, we try to silence them with Genesis answers. Use the categories. I have found, I've been teaching them now to tens of thousands of people for over 15 years. Testing it and learning it and changing it and refining it. The terms, they're simple, but they're helpful. Basically, we want our kids to be Genesis Zionists because many of us, it depends on your age. We 60 and above, we're Genesis Zionists. I'm all in, period. Don't ask questions. It's true. I will always stand with Israel regardless. I'll critique it, but there's nothing that I will not walk away from my children, and I won't walk away from the state of Israel. But our children are Jews by choice. And we have to tell a story that inspires them. Now, I believe that Genesis Judaism and Genesis Zionism is also aspirational and inspiring. The notion of reaching to someone and say, you're a good Jew. You're loved. You're part of my people. You claim me. I have loyalty to you. We see this over and over again in non-Jewish spouses for whom one of the most attractive things about Judaism is this Jewish community, is this unconditional acceptance, this sense that I don't live every day by whether you're a good Jew or a bad Jew. There's something very powerful. There's a joy of Judaism which Genesis gives birth to. Love, grace is a beautiful thing. We just gave Christians grace, so we don't have, we're stupid. Why should I give you grace? I have grace. I'm loved and accepted for who I am, as perfect or imperfect. But you're not going to tell a story today for Jews by choice if all you do is tell a story of Genesis Judaism and Genesis Zionism. We have to find a way to reclaim that particular identity. But that particular identity doesn't feel ultra-nationalist immoral when it is balanced with Exodus expectations. We have to talk Exodus Zionism. Otherwise, our children will not choose to be part of a Judaism without Exodus aspirations. And I want to tell you, nor should they. Nor should they. I love Israel. When I say I'm willing to die for Israel, it's not like, I love you, I'm willing to. No, literally. I was willing to die for Israel. And I almost died for Israel. And I'm still willing. This is not, I'm saying literally, I'm willing to die for Israel. I give my children to go to the army, and I have grandchildren. I'm like, this is not, I'm in. I'm in. I'm not leaving. But why do I do it? I do it because I have a right to be, but also because I believe that the greatness of Israel is the aspiration to create a great society. My inspiration is Exodus Zionism. Yes, I want Israel to fight a just war justly. I want Israeli, Arab, Palestinians to walk around in the world and say, we won the lottery. We are a national minority in the Jewish state. And the way Jews treat minorities is unparalleled in history. I want African refugees who are in Israel to write home and say, we won the lottery. Because we actually came to a people who believe that you're supposed to love the stranger because you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. I want Israel to be a place where we understand that everybody has a right to live their religious life in accordance with their conscience. I want that beacon. That's what I'm fighting for. Hamas doesn't just want to kill me, it wants to kill my dream. Tell your children that's what do I want from you? Talk about Zionism that way. Tell a story of Genesis and tell a story of Exodus, and each child might need a different balance. But when we tell that story, I believe we tell a story that's worthwhile telling. We tell a story that has a chance to inspire. But as I say at the end, tell it, they're going to have to choose. At the end, the answer is still going to be in their hands.
With that, we're going to open it up to some questions. Christopher has a microphone. And raise your hand. Christopher will come around with the microphone. And look at that, after a whole weekend, no questions. No, Jay. Again, before Jay asks the questions, if you have not received this book, you can make sure you head over to Rebecca afterwards and purchase your copy.
First, of course, thank you. Yesterday, in your talk, we asked a question you had not wanted to bring up, but you answered it, about your relationship with God. And you said, God did all this stuff for us and then he left. I think I heard that correctly. Talk a little bit more, please, about the mechanics of that. We have always the story about what did the Israelites actually hear at the foot of Mount Sinai? What do you mean by God left?
I think there was 3 words in your question that I didn't hear. And I feel I'm missing them in order to treat your question respectfully. Could you just go over the first sentence that you said again, please? You said yesterday you said, and then you quoted me as saying something that
that God created the world, set everything up, and then he left.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about the mechanics of how that, what you see that as being.
I don't know.
Thanks a lot.
No, I don't know what the mechanics are, because I know just what I need. I cannot make sense of a God who intervenes in history and the evil and suffering that surrounds us. I can't. Other people can, and I don't tell anybody. I raise my children never talk. Don't agree with. I don't hold my faith in high regard. I don't actually find it profoundly interesting. It's just it's the only way I could breathe. I can't make sense of a God who is just, who's involved in history and has the power to impact, and the reality that we experience. I've never been able to. From 13, this question has been like just sitting on me. And I grew up in a family in which the Holocaust was a non-discussed. Our family grew up in Israel. My family, as I said, moved to Israel the second time in 1830. The first time was in 1670. I grew up that we did not have a single Holocaust survivor in no uncles, no aunts, no cousins. It just wasn't part of my story. But the injustice of it just sat on me as a little kid. I remember 13, before I would go to sleep, I would start saying Kaddish for people who had nobody to say Kaddish for them. The injustice of it just haunted me. And I felt I had to leave because I can't have a relationship with a God. Either God is evil or God is dead. And this tradition, which is telling me to thank God and ask God all the time, I just couldn't. And it was somewhere when I was 18 that I finally, using my Genesis right, that I began to discover, and I learned all the time, I began to discover other aspects of our tradition. My reading of Genesis 1 that I spoke about, I learned much, much later. That was just 10 years ago. But rabbinic statements like, the world pursues its natural course, or, see, the rabbis knew. See, a lot of religion suffers from the fact that God is fantastic in the past, is going to be remarkable in the future, and we're stuck with the present, right? So like, now what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm stuck with here, but the Exodus from Egypt, that's the model? Like, what am I supposed to do? So the dissonance works for people. Because as I said yesterday, chaos doesn't make faith in God, doesn't undermine faith in God, it makes faith in God necessary. Precise when you don't theorize, but you experience chaos, you don't want to walk through the valley of the shadow of death alone. I understand that. I walked through the valley of the shadow of death alone. I did. I paid a terrible price for it, but I couldn't. I couldn't pray. I couldn't ask. And I chose death, literally, instead of prayer. And that paid a heavy price in my life. But I fought for Judaism. Now, I believe in God. I believe that the world is created, I believe that the world is created and that I have a mission and a purpose. But I just know that I don't have a God walking with me every day. I just don't have one. To tell you the truth, I'd love to have one. I want to tell you, I can't tell you how lonely it is. And I can't tell you how often it's unbelievably scary. It really is. It's just scary. You have no one. But at the end, that's the only Jew who I could be. And just like for what I've done, and it defines my teaching. We need a Judaism that works for us. And I'm not claiming that I'm right. I'm not running for politics. I'm not asking if you agree with me. Frankly, I wish many people wouldn't agree with me, but part of my job is to talk honestly about these questions, because there's other people who might have a similar question, feel that they can't be a part of it either. So when a rabbi gets up and says, yeah, I don't have it worked out either. I have a screwed relationship with God too. Like, I don't know all this. So I don't know the mechanics. I don't want to get into the details when exactly God left and how do we have Torah, because that's when it gets all complicated. It's just, because I don't want to go through the technical, what I'm supposed to believe or don't believe. Like, I don't care about those things anyway, but other people do. So I don't know the mechanics. It's just, I know that my tradition loves me and embraces me for who I am. And as a result, I have the power and the right to build a Jewish life that speaks to me. And I want to be a shaliach who tells Jews the same thing. Just walk. And so for me, God just can't be there with me every day. I can't, I should not be alive today. There is no reason in the world that Donniel Hartman should be sitting on this stage. Some of you know this. 2 Syrian tanks, I was a tank commander, 2 Syrian tanks fired on my tank simultaneously from a distance of about 2 miles. And they fired 2 shells, 2 different shells. We had captured a Syrian position, and the other position had strategic control over our position. And as we were looking to the north, we didn't see, they were they were waiting, and they fired and 2 tanks fired, but they fired 2 different shells who reached me with a 5-second differential. The first shell hit and seriously wounded my driver. And he was bleeding and screaming. And all the systems in the tank were out. And I needed him to open up his latch so that we could save his life. The minute he started screaming, I dropped down from the commander's turret. Half of my body was out. And I dropped down and I start speaking. I don't get nervous. I get very calm in dangerous times. I seem to have that. And I'm speaking to him slowly and calmly. And the minute I drop, the second shell hits and blows off the commander's turret. People were touching me. And throughout that day, over and again, I should not have been alive. 2 weeks later, my brother-in-law was killed. So could I say, thank God for saving me? Like, what does it even mean? Like could I say it? Yeah, thank God for saving me, and thank God for killing Arla. Now, some people could say it, and they don't ask, is it consistent? And I don't judge anybody. If it gets you through the day and you're a mensch, stick with it. That dissonance, I can't live with. And so I built an Exodus Judaism on the basis of my Genesis rights. And so I need a God who exists, because that's also very important for me. I love the existence of God. I love the idea that there's a God who exists and reminds every one of us that we're not God. I love the idea that the world is created to remind us that we are not the masters, but that the world is a gift that we have to protect. Those are critical things. And I love a God who left and told us, you have all the skills and all the ability. Now be a mensch and build a worthwhile world.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions in the front row. As Christopher's coming with the microphone. Also want to thank our AV team, Christopher and Roy and Carlos, for really an amazing weekend to make sure this Scholar in Residence doesn't just stay here, but gets out to the world as well.
Thank you. Thank you for making us think differently, perhaps, than we came into this breakfast. This is a time of great divisiveness here in Israel, everywhere. How do you talk to the people who say, I've got nothing to say to him, he's a Hartman?
How do I talk to people? I don't. I've learned not to talk with them. I've learned to, 80% of the Jewish world wants to talk with me. That's enough. It's enough. Like, I don't have to worry. And it's not a trivial issue, because so many people always want to talk to the person who rejects them. It's a disease. It is. And guess who has all the power? The people who reject you. I never understand it. They don't think you're a good enough Jew. How do I convince them? Do you know how much money goes to organizations who think that you're a bad Jew? By people who, through their donations, are supporting organizations that undermine their legitimacy? And they'll honor you at their dinners and deride your Jewishness, both in front of you and behind your back. I have people who come to me sometimes, and I'm lecturing, and I feel that someone's asking me this, like they're asking me, they want a certain truth question, or their answer, and they come from a certain, and at some point I say to them, don't take this wrong, I don't think I'm the right teacher for you. I don't think I'm the right place for you. There are people for whom the Shalom Hartman Institute just shouldn't be, it's not the right place. The Hartman Institute, we don't believe that Jews should pray together, because we don't agree. But we believe that Jews could learn with each other and from each other. But there are Jews who don't believe that. I once had a rabbi who was about to come to a rabbinic program, and he calls me and he says, Rabbi Hartman, I've been selected. I'm coming to your rabbinic program. I just wanted to know, are there going to be teachers who believe that Torah wasn't given at Sinai? And I said, yes, there will. And there will be teachers who believe that Torah came from Sinai, but in any event, nobody's going to tell you. We're going to treat your opinion with utmost respect. Thank you. Calls me the next day. Rabbi Hartman, I wanted to know, are there going to be women rabbis in the program, and am I going to have to learn with them? It was fair? No, it was fair. I said to him, there's going to be women rabbis, and there's going to be women teachers, but this is your space too. You will be respected and protected to the utmost. And you have a right to pick a chavruta that you feel comfortable with. But as a place, there'll be women teachers, men teachers. Calls me the next day. And he says to me, I need to speak to you about gays and lesbian rabbis. And I said to him, you're invited to come, but I really don't think you should come. Because I don't think it's a safe place for you. I think you're coming frightened. So I live in a world where I take it for granted that Orthodox, conservative, Reform, secular, traditional Jews are all equally authentic. I don't think there's any difference in value or in authenticity between any of the denominations. I might live in one because for whatever reasons, but I don't think but for many Jews, it's not. And so those Jews, when I just say that sentence, I'm the enemy. Knock yourself out. As I like to say, my mother loves me. So you can't take that away from me. So you don't love me. It's like you have to, what you need to do is you have to connect to your own legitimacy, and then you don't feel threatened by the person who rejects you. The person who says, I don't want to talk to you, God bless you, and that's okay too. I'll protect myself. If someone says I'm not allowed to perform a marriage, I'll violate the law. And I perform marriages in Israel. And so I violate the law. My students perform marriages in Israel. We proudly violate the law, but when anybody says they want to control the entrance point to Judaism, 90% of the Jewish people stay outside. And so we fight that. That you don't want to talk to me, that's the least of my problems.
We want to talk to you longer. Last question. Howard. 1 second, Christopher's coming over.
Thank you, Rabbi Hartman, for 3 days of brilliant commentary, for bringing up questions, asking questions, and answering them that I never knew I could answer or question of to you. I also want to thank Roz and Abner Goldstine for sponsoring this session. And I really appreciate the in-depth emotion that you showed in your conversation. So I'd like to end on a little bit of a lighter note and ask you a softball question this time. Would you mind telling us, to the extent that you want to, what do you do to unwind? What are your hobbies? Do you love music? Do you like sports?
What do I do to unwind?
Do you like sports? What about your family? Tell me a little bit about lighter things in your life rather than all of these serious yet important questions that you've talked about. Thank you.
So first of all, I want to thank Abner and Ross as well. I don't want to only thank you for this. You exemplify the menschlich type of Jewishness that is a story that could win. And it's really an honor to be in your presence. As my childhood friend Stuart knows, I'm very, very intense. We've lost most of our friends because no one wants to go out to the movies with me. Sometimes it's a little much. I've become a little too much. I have to actually, I meditate. That's kept me sane since the age of 17. I do transcendental meditation 1 to 2 times a day. I'm a runner. I've run multiple marathons, half Ironman, triathlons. Now I'm getting old, so I run 6 miles. Shabbos saves me. Shabbos, I read stupid novels. Preferably when somebody dies. It's like, fashionist. Like every one of them, there's some terrorist something somewhere. Come Shabbos, I shut down. I just shut down. And I find I have difficulty getting up. It's like I need to just, but I do live. This is part of my challenge. I'm cursed and blessed by a father who at the age of 3 told me, Donniel, you're responsible. And I didn't even know what I was responsible for. But you're responsible. And my whole life, like, Jewish people weigh on me. And I owe them. And it's my responsibility to serve them to the best of my ability. And there's tremendous needs and pain and suffering and mutual hatred and confusion. And so I'm haunted by that. I am. When I run, I'm less haunted. And Shabbos, just like God left in Genesis 1, I leave the Jew. To see as least Jews as possible on Shabbos is a good day. But it's, to live in a generation where Jews have to choose to be Jewish means that we have to be outstanding. Mediocrity is not going to do it. And so my life is not in balance. I could give you great lectures and advice on how you should balance your life. My life has meaning. It's exhausting. It was really a pleasure being with all of you. Thank you.
And I want to thank Rabbi Donniel Hartman from the Hartman Institute. Make sure you buy your book. Again, the podcast, for heaven's sake, just an amazing, amazing insight into what you heard this weekend. Continue that piece. Have a wonderful week.